Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ride with Purpose, the podcast where we talk about cycling, strength training, faith, fitness, and everything in between. And today I am joined by a very special guest, Derek Teel, owner of Dialed Health and founder of Dialed Health, which is, I think, probably the biggest strength training for cyclists platform in the world. So welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for the kind intro. Very stoked to be here with you, Eli.
Dude, okay. You have had something huge happen in your life just about 1 year ago and like 3 days today, right? You posted about it, and I want to know how you're feeling. Just give the audience maybe a little bit of context, but then how are you feeling 1 year after this incident?
Well, I'm starting to feel good, genuinely. It's taken longer than expected, though, because I went through something so hard, and you would hope to have gained some strength mentally, physically, after going through a process like that. But it's taken a while to get to the point where I'm confidently feeling stronger, at least mentally, if anything. So for some context, just over a year ago, I was T-boned by a car that blew a stop sign at what's estimated to be 60 miles an hour. And thankfully, I jumped right before impact, and most of the injuries were my lower body. My brain and my spine were intact, but
that's good.
I broke my tibia, my femur, had an open pelvis fracture, which was very messy, torn colon, collapsed lung, and just lost a lot of blood. So ended up in the ICU, a few days of surgery, and basically woke up with just so many questions and things up in the air. You know, my entire job is so physical. Everything I'm interested in is so physical. I didn't know if I'd really be getting my body back and how to really provide for my family, because I have 3 young boys and a beautiful wife. So it was a really, really scary time. And there were complications along the way, including a wound that didn't close for 11 months. And
So it just recently closed.
Yeah. I got a cortisone shot that actually did the trick. So we don't know if it's a long-term solution yet. If it's not, then I'll have some hardware removed that we believe is causing the problem. So we have some answers, but for now it's closed, and it's been really nice.
Okay. This is a huge change in I guess life. Can I ask, what were some of the, and I kind of want to get vulnerable here, what were some of the darkest thoughts that went through your mind in a time like that?
Well, when it happened, the only thing I could think about was my boys growing up without a father, and my wife not having her husband and no one to take care of them. We have really close family, but that's the darkest thought I ever had, because when you think it's actually going to happen, it really hits harder than anything I could have imagined. And it's strange because part of me would assume that I wouldn't have a fear of death, knowing that I'm going to such a better place. But all I could think about, I mean, to be totally transparent, was just my wife and my boys. And so that was for sure the darkest thing. And I was talking to another cyclist about those thoughts after the injury, because it took me, I was fully conscious for the entire thing. You know, I remember literally holding my pelvis in my hand.
There was never at any point, any time where you were like unconscious.
No.
Wow.
No, not really. It's funny because when I got hit, I cartwheeled and spun so fast, I think I blacked out for a second. I did break my helmet in 2 different places, but I had no head injury. So the only thing I don't remember, the only thing I don't remember was actually like hitting the ground. But there were witnesses, and I wasn't unconscious for any period of time. I remember everything, felt everything. And it was 45 minutes before I got to the emergency room. So it's just a long time to stare at the ceiling of an ambulance with no pain medication and think about
your thoughts.
Yeah, that thought. And so that's the darkest it got. And thankfully that's not the case. And I'm here. And
did you imagine that you would be here today in your own, like, a new studio and everything set up and you're fully recovered, and you did an event, like a really hard one?
But yeah, that was too much. That was honestly too much. I think I needed that though, to feel confident that I was doing everything I could in the recovery process. And I also think that played off some bad habits that I had previously where I was overworking myself. And I think some of it was from excitement, but some of it was also from not trusting God and his timeline and knowing that I can slow down and I don't have to stress myself out unnecessarily to recover and accomplish certain things, because, you know, God can do so much more than I can do. And me overworking myself was really trying to control every situation. And same with trying to cover or recover too quickly. And like, yeah, the event you're talking about is a Grand Fondo in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Really big day on the bike. Way too.
How much elevation was it?
It was
like,
16K.
Yeah.
Day,
so it's
or
like
14, 16,
lot.
something like that.
That's a lot.
But ultimately, my goal was to do the full Everest. So in the past, I've done some version of an Everest ride every year for the past 4 years. And I've done a enduro bike Everest, a traditional road Everest, a double Everest, an Everest Rome. And so my dream story that I had concocted in my head was that it would be the ICU to Everest story, where I come out of the ICU and in the same year Everest. And I thought at least by the end of the year I'd be able to get that done. And I was like, I could make it even more dreamy and go to Switzerland and do it in this, bucket list place. And that's what I wanted, but it obviously wasn't meant to be. And it wasn't what I should have done, because it just beat me into the ground. It made this trip that should have been an absolute dream very stressful.
Yeah.
And so I still did enjoy it. And it was obviously necessary for me. Sorry, I got a gnat flying in front of my face here. It was obviously necessary for the healing process, but it was not really till I finished that to where I started backing off and making real steady progress. It was like that was enough for me to be like, okay, I'm trying way too hard. I need to back off and just trust God more with the timeline.
Do you think you overestimated yourself?
Yeah, for sure.
But like, okay. So there's this quote that immediately reminded me of, because this is a quote that's been coming up for me quite a bit, just on repeat. It's not like any fancy quote, but it's man plans, God laughs. Just like,
yeah,
there's, we can sit here and plan, but even Proverbs says, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the Lord establishes our steps. And I think, what do you think are the benefits? Like, if we can flip the script a little bit, is there any benefit to coming out of that event the way you did, like not performing as well as you did?
I think it was the confidence of knowing that going that direction and trying to do so much wasn't the right thing to do. It's like I really that was the pinnacle of me trying everything as a trainer, as someone with this like record of
and background and
like accomplishments on the bike that didn't really make sense. Like when I double Everested 27 hours, my riding volume at the time was like 9 hours a week. And like the fact that my body could do it didn't really make sense.
Yeah, actually 9 hours isn't that much.
No. So there were these physical feats that I had done, and I know I'm capable of that, and I've always had such a durable body, but post-injury, it was really just not the same, and it was way too soon. And so I did overestimate what I could do, but I had just never gone through something like that. And I had gone through hard injuries. I've torn my ACL and had full reconstructive surgery. I've had like 7 other broken bones and concussions and torn ligaments. And my list of injuries from downhill racing, which was like my first passion in cycling, was very extensive, more than the average person experiences in a lifetime. And so even though I had been through all of those things, this was on such another level that I had no gauge of how or what I'd be capable of. And I was just kind of going off of how it's been in the past. So I learned it was too much. And even though that trip was a very emotionally draining and expensive way to learn that I need to back off, I did learn that, which
was
was
still
good.
Worth it. You went to Switzerland.
It was worth it. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely worth it. And it was cool. It was both actually my wife and I's first time to Europe.
Yeah.
And
Europe is
it,
a different riding experience.
yeah, it was
So
really, really
gorgeous.
cool. So I feel like it almost made us just more excited to go back, really.
You're planning on it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Nice. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have mountain bike experience, but this is what I have seen and heard is that with mountain biking, the injuries are more frequent, but a lot smaller in magnitude with at least being on the road. They are less frequent, but as for your experience, they can be enormous.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty safe thing to say generally. I mean, it's like you crash more often on a mountain bike, but a lot of times you can slide out. Maybe you have, I mean, especially if you're doing the more gravity side of the sport, you have knee pads, you have like more gear
Yeah.
on. Um, but then again, people die mountain biking from injuries. People die on the
Yeah.
road bike. Everything happens in between. And I think I've been around both sports for long enough to know that you're just out taking a risk regardless of what you do. And I don't think really that risk should determine where your passion is at. Like I understand making specific decisions because, your livelihood and family and trying to protect all of that. But there's a point where you can't live in a bubble and anything can happen anywhere. And so
Hmm.
even now getting back, I am riding more patiently. Part of the problem was me not completely stopping at a stop sign. And it was a very freak situation, but I've been open about that from the beginning. And ultimately assuming a car was going to do what they should have done and
Is stop. Right.
is stop. And that's made a big difference though, just riding more patiently and going out knowing that is the number one priority. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but when it comes down to the sport and choosing it, I think you should really enjoy what brings you the most happiness on the bike. Because I mean, I think ultimately that's the reason we're doing it is
Yeah.
because it can be a really fun, healthy hobby.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let me ask you a question. To dig a little bit deeper here, how important or how much did your faith impact the recovery process? And kind of like going back to the thoughts aspect, just to give a practical example, I'm working with a client who came out of the really bad Achilles heel injury last year. And as we're on the recovery process, there are some days where he has like a flare up. And during those days, his thoughts become so negative. He's like, man, I'm never going to be able to ride my bike again. This sucks. I hate this. Like, it's just kind of like a really negative thought pattern. And so at least what we're doing is kind of like keeping a thought record, and that's what they call it in psychotherapy. Biblically speaking, it's called taking thoughts captive and kind of like replacing them with true thoughts, with thoughts that are actually going to move him towards his goals. So at least for you during this entire thing, what was the thought process like? Like how much did that help? Did your faith have anything to do with it?
Yeah, that's great. Those triggers are really hard to navigate because you can go from being completely at peace in your mind to thinking
Yeah.
just very, very sad things very quickly.
Yeah.
Like the way it can shift your whole demeanor is insane. I've realized that trauma and the fear that comes from it could literally ruin your life. You could make decisions based off of one event. Like that one piece of trauma could affect every decision you make in your life completely outside and things that are completely unrelated. And I'm extremely grateful that for one, I have a solid family foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm connected to my church and have really wise spiritual guidance. And I've also had uh, a therapist who is a Christian who understands how to help me uproot all this stuff. I've done specific trauma therapy like EMDR, which it stands for like eye movement uh, detection something. But I've been through a lot of specific therapies to try and reframe or take this thought captive and remove the fear from it.
Mm.
And a lot of that's been really effective. And then a lot of it too came from the recovery process and complications. Like I had a really bad infection that was very scary. I had this open wound for 11 months. And, it's crazy. When your skin's not healed in one spot for 11 months, you really do question if it's ever going to get fixed or
Yeah,
if
of
it
course.
can.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And so I understand those triggers where you get one thing that is stuck in your brain and you start to fixate on it, and then it completely derails. It feels like a lot of the progress that you made. So I think taking those thoughts captive are super important. And for me, I'm reading a book right now called, it's by Craig Groeschel.
Winning the
And
war in your mind.
thank you, Winning the War in Your Mind. And he has chapters on how to reframe principles, like what he calls it. And basically I've been writing down biblical affirmations to reframe this. And one thing I've noticed, so like I went from thinking very specific, very sad, dark thoughts to actually just kind of becoming negative and almost like assuming the worst would always happen in anything in life. And so I started noticing this, and this is where this reframe principle became even more impactful, because it's reminding me to actually just to focus on what's good and pure and right, and focus on those things and actually rewire your brain and the thought patterns. And it's the whole neuroplasticity thing where you can
Right.
literally change what you think about and what you see in the world. And that whole process is so necessary to get to the point where you don't see that trauma as fear anymore, and you can see it as something positive, or you can acknowledge it for what it is and feel kind of indifferent about it. And so that was kind of a word salad of just saying that I think it's great you're doing that with your client. And I've gone through the same process. And it's really a combination of, for one, my own personal faith, being clear about what my triggers are, and then having those support systems in place to make sure that you're actually addressing things.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, how has it been? I know it's like you have done the transition and you're back in here, and now I kind of want to talk about the studio in a bit, but what's
Yeah.
the transition been like from injury back to work? Like, did you feel like, I know you mentioned, your very physical job. Did you feel like, are you ever going to be able to do something like this again? Or like, what was that like? And now that you're fully transitioned, you're back and you're even training in person, how has that been?
It's been really great. I'm actually not training in person yet. I
Okay. I
have,
saw a few, maybe not clients or on your
yeah,
story.
I have friends and I have some athletes
Friends.
that are rolling through, but I'm not doing any official in-person training yet. That is the plan, to get back to it. We have a little bit more construction in the studio and a couple things I need to just tie up before I bring that back. But uh, getting back to work has been one of the most frustrating processes that I've ever experienced with work. And I mean, it's up there. Like
What do you
it's up
mean?
there with like COVID, how frustrating it is.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. It's because there had already been a lot of transition in my business because of, for one, COVID, but even before that, making a transition online, training in person, breaking off of subleasing from a place and starting my own studio, and like all these all these transitions. And it's crazy because before this injury, like I had mentioned earlier in the show, I started getting a lot of new opportunities presented to me in a way that I had never experienced before. And it's very fun, very exciting, but also very distracting, to
Mm.
the point now where I can confidently say that I think started getting away from the real core of what my product is, which are improving the platform and the content on that platform, the workout programs and the workouts, and how the whole user interface works between the website and the app, and customer service, and then focusing on like brand partnerships and event activations, and being more of an athlete than I really need to be. There's a guy I look up to, Nick Pear. I'm not sure if you've
Hmm.
heard of him, from Bear Performance Nutrition, but he put out this piece of content about being a full-time CEO and a part-time athlete. And that really resonated with me because that's really how I've reshifted my frame of thinking. Because as I've come back into starting work again, for one, there was the frustration of literally physically not being
Not
able
being
to
capable,
do
right?
what I could do. From the writing shots that I use in content to demoing a workout, unbelievably frustrating. And so that was hard to navigate, and it's gotten easier, obviously, as I've recovered. But I was stepping back into work and realizing that there were so many things I was doing. I almost didn't know what was the most important thing to do. And so I felt like I was just spinning this circle where everything was frustrating me because it felt like too much time and there was 10 other things I needed to do. I I would have days where I was very productive but still not be satisfied because I didn't do this insane list that I expected from myself. And I know this is very common with business owners in general,
Right.
but I had taken this to such an extreme to the point where it was literally like self-sabotage. And
Mm.
so I think this was just me with a grow at all cost mentality. And I think it was necessary for a short period of time when I had started business because I always used to call myself just like a dreamer and I wanted to become a doer. So that
Mm.
the habits I built from going from just a dreamer to a doer were a lot of the things in place now, but I had already established a lot of business and I didn't need to continue to I just needed to really work the business and not continue to just say yes to everything and add new and more and
Right.
better and grow and grow. And it's like I couldn't get myself to stop. And so this injury did make me stop. It did make me realize that I was going too far that direction. And so once I got more confident in that and my new motto this year, which is do less better, I started becoming more clear on what the most important things are in the business. And I think that in combination with just being more physically capable to perform exercises and create content and just be in my own training, nail my own training to obviously just live the product with the people. Like it's gotten so much better. And this studio is actually a representation of really refocusing on what's important. And actually the way I got it back is really kind of hilarious if you want to hear that story too.
I do want to hear that story, but
Yeah.
right before that, I like do less better is really sticking with me. I don't know why, but it's just like maybe it's something I say to my clients where when they're doing an exercise, I tell them I'd rather you do 2 really quality reps rather than 10 just like going through the motions. You're not focusing on anything. And I think that's why it's sticking with me. It's kind of like pursuing excellence in the thing that you're doing and just like focusing on the details. But that really came from, was it, I think in entrepreneurship, there are so many shiny distractions.
Yeah.
And if you can just like put those aside and focus on the thing that really matters, even if it's one small really thing, you're going to get much further. Is that where it stemmed from?
Yeah. That is how I was when I started my platform.
Mm-hmm.
Laser focused. But to be honest, I was also very naive in the reality of some business operations. And the best example of that is wanting to own my own app and
Yeah.
develop it from the ground up.
Which is a
That,
process and a half.
oh my gosh, that was so eye opening because I was so dead set on doing it, but I didn't understand the reality of it. I was trying to create a product that is going to compete in the tech world with teams of people who are strictly focused on raising money for the product and just developing the product. And no part of that process are you actually adding the content to the product or promoting the product. And so I started, I'm not saying I regret doing it because I've learned a lot. And now I do have an app that I can work from and that a lot of people are happy with. But there's also this whole host of problems and this endless money pit that it becomes. And also realizing, okay, if I wanted this piece of the product to be the most important thing, I now have to turn into a fundraiser in the tech world and I'm basically not going to be a trainer anymore. And I
Yeah.
want to be a trainer. And so it was the process like that became very defeating. So I was like very laser focused up until this point where I launched an app, and then I realized the reality of it. And at that same time, I had grown enough online that I had all these other opportunities. And that's when like that shiny object syndrome came in
Yeah.
hard, because I was like vulnerable. I didn't have my direction anymore, because my North Star was the app. And then it was like, oh, this isn't actually what I thought it would be. And then all these other distractions came in. And I think that's what led to just the lack of focus. And it feels good to get back to that point now, because
Yeah.
I feel it's funny, but I'm being more productive now, like in this last month, and I am I don't feel constantly stressed about everything. And some of that I will say had to do with having, I had 3 kids under 2 when my oldest son was
Wow.
1.5. I had twins. And so that also happened like within a year of COVID and all this
And
stuff.
then the
So
gym stuff, and yeah,
yeah,
that's
and that's the thing. Like it's definitely hindsight now, but I'm just on so many levels in a better place to make better decisions, that it's exciting to have that growth from this whole thing. Because even the kids alone, it really changes the dynamic for sure. And so, um, yeah, yeah,
do you think
I
that
guess that.
I know, like, I think this is just the way God works things, but everything happens all at once. Like, you got COVID, and then you got kids, and then you got your businesses all over the place. And then, like, it's just like everything gets crammed into this, like, chaotic time. How did you overcome that?
I
Or you just like looking back, like, I don't know, I just got through.
uh, well, I I will say I have been consistent with the things that matter.
Hmm.
So business and family and bikes, like that, those to me have been the things that have mattered. And those are pretty much the only things I have done. Like I have made a lot of mistakes and said yes to too much and gotten distracted, but they were all things that pointed back to either the business, my family, or bikes. Like the
Hmm.
amount of stuff I've said no to that wasn't in those categories over the last 5, 6 years is insane.
But that's
And
probably one of the most important things you've ever done. Like, set those boundaries and say
yeah,
no where it counts.
that is one thing. And now what's funny is I'm still focused like that, but I've learned to set boundaries even within those parameters. And I think that's what's starting to make a lot of difference now. But
Hmm.
initially it was like, okay, no, you're not going to go dirt biking with your friends for this weekend, even though you got an invite and they can ride their motorcycles and you do this and that, because it doesn't line up with the goal. It doesn't support my family. It doesn't make me a better cyclist, really. So I was making decisions based off of that. And I think that at least amount of focus was really, really helpful in the
Hmm.
beginning. And now it's almost like even more finding tune that. And what's funny is that I've noticed as I start saying no to more things within the business, it's actually opening up time for just kind of more fun, random stuff with my
Hmm.
family, seeing their needs a little bit more, allowing myself to relax and separate and distance myself from work or from bikes a little bit. It's been really cool.
I mean, before we hopped on the podcast, before we started recording, we were kind of talking a little bit about balance. Can you tell me how you I know it's hard, but how do you balance everything? Or is it more like sprints coming up here and there?
Yeah, I think sprints is a good way to look at it. I think the perfect life balance thing is kind of this fallacy, because you have to do things at times that are unsustainable to move the needle forward.
Yeah.
I think the best example is someone starting their career or going through a degree or some type of educational process. There's no way you could keep up studying like that and the
Not
time it
for
takes to
life, yeah.
learn for your whole life. But oh, this is 4 years. Oh, this is 1 year. This is
Right.
6 months. And for that reason, it makes sense. There's also times I think with dieting that can be the same thing. If you're trying to make a meaningful shift in body composition, sometimes you have to do something unsustainable for a month to really push the needle a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just the reality of how business is too. You have to sometimes like get laser focused and work so hard for a month just to like move the needle forward a little
Yeah.
bit and to actually make some progress.
But
And
it's the same with fitness. It's the same with cycling. It's the same with all of it.
yeah, and sometimes with your family too,
Yeah.
you have to just spend a few days just with your family and just completely being present and completely writing off work. Now, that's not the majority of the year. So I get the understanding for balance, but I think a little bit of ebb and flow is okay. I think it's okay to know, hey, Monday, and I'm someone who creates my own schedule, so I have the luxury of saying it like this, but Monday, I'm going to do an extra long work day. But also Tuesday, I can spend a little bit more time with my kids and do like a half work day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more comfortable doing those things now. And one thing that's interesting, it's like, especially since having my twins, you know, my wife needs a break. My wife needs an absolute break. And what's cool is that a lot of times I can spend time with the boys and also give her some time to
relax, recharge,
do whatever she needs to do. And so I'm learning that better, but I'm also seeing that you can't sometimes look at something just in the capacity of a day, and sometimes looking at the whole week and being like, okay, listen, like I really want to spend a quality time with my boys,
mm-hmm.
but I probably can't do it every single day because like, even when I come home from work, we're having dinner, they're doing this and that,
you're distracted.
And there's like enough things going on where it's not like we're going to sit down and you just do something together without interruption for a while. Or I'm not going to be able to go take them to a bounce house or take them on a bike ride or do something like take them to the lake, let them throw rocks in the water. That's not going to be able to happen every day either. But when you look at the span of a week, then you could say, okay, well, I could go extra hard on this day for work because, I have a podcast scheduled and I have extra things that are not the norm. And that makes sense. But I can also kind of make up for it on another day because there's nothing on my calendar and it's a little bit more free. And maybe I'm ahead in this one area. So I think I'm definitely not perfect at it, but I've started looking at it more on that time frame where it's like, okay, I can't do everything every single day to the highest level that I would want to. But over the course of a week, I can kind of move things around enough to really accomplish what I would want. So maybe that would be my best advice for somebody looking for balance, is to see it on more of a weekly time frame instead of just what you have to do every single day.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, my balance is completely out of whack, but I look at it in like seasons time frame. Like I know during these past 4 months and like maybe the next month, I've been really in a heavy business grind, but when my wife gives birth in 2 months, that's going to change. And so I can't be in a business grind when you have a newborn. And so I know that I'm going to have to put everything else in maintenance and most of my attention is going to go there. And so it's just like, for me, it's like you said, moving the needle forward takes an extra amount of effort. And I know like September, October rolls around, for some reason, that's always peak fitness for me. And I allow that to happen as well.
Nice. That's a really good example. I think that's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
And maybe the best thing that we've done is like we've made the conscious decision that on Sundays we're not going to work and we're not going to exercise. We're not like, it's just going to be a day to chill together, family, rest. And it's been really, really helpful for us, especially like not only do I go into Monday pumped to get work done because that's kind of like my personality, but also it's just like well-needed rest. I think that's also how God designed us.
Dude, I have a buddy who practices Sabbath every week, and it's really challenged me to look at that. And
you should try it.
I feel like maybe besides tithing, a Sabbath is one of the most countercultural things you could do.
It really
is in the US, especially as a business owner, especially as actually, I don't know how old you are, but I'm a millennial, and it's like that millennial business hustle culture. I love it. I actually,
the hustle culture or the Sabbath or both.
Both. Like I love the hustle culture. It
drives
me
you
a lot.
Yeah.
to get to where I am. And I love the energy and the urgency and the focus and like the
The
purpose.
drive. Yeah.
But you are 1,000% right. I mean, God rested on the seventh day after creating the earth. And I've also realized that if you don't remove yourself and you don't give yourself some time to recover, you lose that intensity too.
Yeah.
And
And what's
it's
hard
funny.
is like you hear people like, I think Alex Hormozy worked the first 100 days of the year nonstop, and you're like, I don't want to get behind, but then you need to rest. It's otherwise your performance goes down. It's like working
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think it's a flaw to give advice like that and to not acknowledge the need for rest or to stop and listen to God.
Right.
And there's like a lot of really like busyness is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Busyness is this thing disguised as productivity, even if your heart's in the right area, that can distract you from God. It can distract you from your real calling and the needs of people around you. Like busyness is a very dangerous thing that I think the devil uses to move people the way that he wants to move and to move
The
people away
quote
from.
I think I know what you're talking about. The quote is, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy.
Yeah, that's great.
That's the one.
Yeah, that is very, very legit. And I think part of not being busy is a faith. It's like a faith builder. It's feeling like, yeah, maybe I do need to be more focused, but I don't have to be as busy if it's stopping you from really connecting with God. Or again, the Sabbath thing, that is such a challenge. So it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm working with a cycling coach now, and we just recently moved my off day to Sunday for the same reason.
Enjoy.
So, and it doesn't have to be Sunday, to my understanding, but I wanted a day that I wasn't. What I had done was like my rest day from workouts and riding was on a work day, and I would amp up work to kind of counteract that.
Yeah.
Opposed to seeing it as an opportunity to really relax. And so what's funny now is that Sabbath has turned into kind of like an optional workout day. Like yesterday I did a run and did a little yoga. It was very chill day. But I also did something that I wouldn't have normally prioritized, which was hang a mirror for my wife in our new house. And it's like, those are the types of things I just never made time for because I didn't open up enough for it. And stopping and spending more time with the boys. It's funny because we actually normally go to church on Saturday nights, but like creating this space for whatever has been really good. And even stopping myself from getting on YouTube and putting in headphones while the kids are watching the Minions or something like that, and actually just watching whatever's on, being with them, talking to them. So it's a really, really good challenge, very countercultural, but I think it lines up with everything we're talking about as well.
But
getting that rest.
It's for us, it's the best day of the week. It's also similar to, if you're on the bike and you're doing a hard interval, the only way to continue performing is at some point you're going to need to take a break. And especially if you're really pushing hard, the intensity is going to have to come down. Maybe sometimes you can like recover with zone 2 and some active recovery there, but at some point you're going to have to take a passive recovery. I think it's just how God designed us. Okay. Question. You said there's a funny story. What's the funny story about the studio?
Oh, the studio. Well, I left the studio 2 years ago, and this is when I was fully online. I had this studio space. It's the same exact one I'm in right now. I left it with no intention of coming back. Basically,
it's the same studio.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Literally
That's already
the same
funny as it is, but
unit. So I had moved here. I had a full-time in-person business at that time, built it out to train up to like 5 people. It's only 1,000 square feet. But it's just an awesome space for like solo sessions or a small group. And as the online grew, I was leveraging it more for content. Got to a point where I started cutting back the amount of hours I was doing in person, filming more, using the space. And then I got to a point where I was full-time just using this as like a
content studio
pretty much, and recording my podcast and just working at like a place to separate myself and work. Well, it was funny because I was paying rent here, and commercial leases aren't cheap. And I was paying rent at home. And one of my wife and I's goals was to buy a home and to pay a mortgage. And it was funny. I think my parents had brought it up to me. They're like, listen, you're not really using this place like you were. You should just build out a spot in a new home because you could afford the mortgage based off both rent payments. And I was like, dang, you're right. Like, I really could.
Hence the
And
garage gym.
I want to try it. Yeah. So I moved everything into my garage. We built it out to look very similar. A lot of people didn't even know I left because I used the same wall paint.
Yeah, I didn't know you left. Like it was well done. It was very smooth.
Thank you. I think it actually worked good based off how much space I had, but there were so many little things I had to do to make it work. I realized that it was a really difficult space to continue to progress with everything I was doing. So many little things, from climate control. I mean, in Sacramento, it gets 100 plus degrees in a garage, or it'll be 35 degrees in your garage. And you have a big water heater and like all the other stuff in your garage. So like you can't point the camera certain angles, and lighting's always an issue. There's always like, it was really hard to work with, but we made it happen. And then when I had this injury, it was perfect because I could just step outside and rehab. And I spent so much time out there just doing anything I could. So in those two, and then it helped us save and ultimately buy our home. And because our overhead was so low, like just being able to buy our home became possible. So we were able to do that, which was incredible. And what's funny is that I assumed having an office in the new house, having a little bit bigger garage, would make the distractions from home easier, but it did not make any difference at all. I have 3 little boys under 5. They're so loud. They're old enough now where they just come and rip your door open, and no matter what, or even if everything's closed, I'll have noise canceling headphones and I can still hear them screaming and running up and down the hall. Or it's just like this endless thing. I step out to grab a glass of water, and my wife thinks I'm in a bad mood, but really I'm just focused on something. You know, it's like the vibe and the energy of the household was completely off. And so I called my old landlord who owns this space and a couple other people I knew who had commercial real estate. And I just said, hey, I just need a place to work. I need like 150 square foot office and a window. I was like, what do you have? And so I went and checked out single offices, really had no plan on coming back to the studio. And when I got a hold of Dave, who owns this, he's like, dude, he's like, you're never going to believe who's trying to get out of their space right now. He's like, the lady that took your suite and turned it into a yoga studio is ready to move out, like now.
Really?
And he's like, I know it's more than you are hoping for, but just think about it. I'll give you a deal, and she'll be out. I'll be getting paid, and you'll have a spot. And I'm like, dang, I need to think about this. So then I tried to do this in a way that I didn't romanticize it too much, but I really thought about all the things that the studio allowed me to do that I couldn't do from home. And those reasons I listed previously, like lighting, climate control, the focus space, office, it checks every single box besides the fact that you have to pay the rent to be here. And so then I had also realized, well, I can make up the rent pretty quickly training people in person. And to be honest, dude, one thing I have noticed not training people in person the last couple of years is that I'm a little rusty.
Just a little bit. But that's just part of the process, right?
I think it is. And it's funny because I've really focused a lot more on just education in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Just daily education, even if it's reading an article from Training Peaks or studying for a new cert, or I just got my first aid certification done. Like just,
but then like the education versus the application can be completely different.
It can, but even just the education can help sharpen you up on things. And then when you're training people in person, and I think this has been a huge separator when I initially launched my product, you understand the barriers that are in reality and why some workouts may look good on paper, but actually once you try to do them, don't work as well as you thought. A lot of that comes from working with people in person, right, and having someone else who's completely unfamiliar with the programming go through it. Right. And you realize, oh, I can't pair these 2 exercises together because of this reason. Or, you know, gyms never have these pieces of equipment near each other, so I can't make a circuit with it. There's little things like that.
It's just experience.
Totally. And so those things, along, you know, writing programs, answering questions, those have started to get not as sharp as they were. And I was like, training people in person at a a small quantity could be very useful for all of that. So basically I thought about it and I was like, this space almost feeds the entire machine that is Dialed Health. And for that reason, I think it's worth coming back. And it's crazy, but since setting it up, it's already made a world of difference. I think having this controlled workspace in combination with being more focused on what my goals are again, and saying no to more and more and more that doesn't align with that, is already producing really good results. It has not been easy, but I'm very, very excited about what the rest of this year holds for sure.
I mean, if it's not easy, that's how you know it's kind of worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Sometimes I just see that as a
it's
challenge.
not easy and it sucks.
And it's not, but yeah, that's what's so funny about it. It's like, it's just God timing. It really is, because I stepped away, was able to do the things that I needed. I had the support through the injury, and then I'm able to come back
same place,
be in the same space. And I don't know if I'm really supposed to say this, but I'm actually paying less than I was before. And
your landlord is giving you a blessing. That's so funny.
Right. And that's why I say it, is because like it's a God thing. It's just insane.
How else would that happen?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay. Yeah. I have one last question for you. And this is something someone else asked me earlier, and I was like, this is a good question. If tomorrow Dialed Health just fully disappeared, you're not on the earth, all your social media is gone, and there was only one quote that you could leave someone with, just like one piece of advice, what would it be?
This is a question I really wish I could have prepped for.
Sorry, I know we didn't do any prep.
My first thought was to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength.
That's honorable.
That was genuinely my first thought, because
everything else flows from that.
Yeah, but it is true, but it's also what I had to come back to during my injury when I didn't know if I could come back. You know what I mean? So it's like knowing that Dialed Health feels like it's my calling, and it's my closest it's like the thing that the direction I believe I should be going. But if it was completely wrong, I know there's more for me, but it comes back to just trusting God through that. And again, it's like, it's not Dialed Health. It's like all the other things that are represented by it, or the impact that it's having, or even the opportunity to speak with you today and talk about our faith and the fact that that is the glue that holds everything together. It all comes back to loving God and trusting Him with all your heart, with all your mind, soul, and strength. So that's probably what I would say. I
appreciate that. I like how it's rooted in scripture. It's not really like just something you came up with yourself. Do you think that, I know it's a scary thought to have, but do you think that if just by chance everything that you were doing and everything that you were building with Dialed Health was not God's calling, it's just something that you've been working on by yourself, and clearly, but the way the conversation has went, that's not the case, but what would you do?
I'd hope that I'd listen, but I don't think you really know until you're in that situation, to be honest. I would hope that I would listen. I'll tell you, this whole accident experience has made me, I don't know how to say this in the right way, but it's made me fear God more, because I know that God will do whatever He needs to do to get you focused on the right thing. And what's scary is that, yeah, the things that you want so bad internally may not be the right thing. And that's, I think, kind of like the root of that question, which is like, man, this is the thing I'm like the most passionate about and that I would want, but is it what God wants? Yeah, you don't know. And it's almost scary to think that it wouldn't be. But I think with that said, there's a lot of fine tuning that I'm already starting to do now that makes me more and more confident that it is what he wants me to do. And if that transitioned into something else, I know it would be okay. Like it would, in fact, it would probably be better, or it would be, I guess, if it was God's calling. So
It has to be.
yeah. So the fear around that isn't as much as it would be, but I also see how real it is that that could be reality. Like that whole thing kind of is scary, but it comes back to trust. And so I'd like to think that it would be okay. And to be honest, one thing that's very cool about entrepreneurship, being a trainer, is that you develop skills that could really translate into
to
a
everything.
lot of other businesses.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing I've thought about. I was like, okay, if I really wasn't doing Dialed Health, like what would I do? And I think it always comes back to some types of sales
You have skills.
job.
Yeah.
It is really, yeah. Or something in self-development or real estate, or my mom runs her own business as an interior designer. Like it's crazy.
Coaching doesn't
that overlap.
related to fitness isn't just like limited to fitness. Coaching goes like there's so many different coaching offers nowadays. Like that's a skill in and of itself.
Yeah. And it's pretty crazy to think, dude, but I'm 33, and the amount that's happened in the last 6 to 8 years is pretty unbelievable, actually. And sometimes I think I'm like, wow, it'd be insane to think that I wouldn't have some I don't want to say like some other career, but like if you told me that in my late 50s or 60s I was doing something completely different, I mean I wouldn't be surprised either. If you told me I was doing the same thing, I would not be surprised. And so I really feel like if it were to change, it would be for the better. Yeah.
I think there's also something to say about the second half of the verse that you quoted, because it's in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight.
Yeah.
And I think it's just knowing that he will make the path straight. Like no matter what happens, even if it's an injury, even if it's something like literally life-threatening, your path is still going to be straight and he's still going to send you where he wants to send you. I think that like at the end of the day, it's scary, but that's what faith is. It's just like you have to trust. You don't know what's going to happen. Like we don't know if it's going to work out, but that's what it tells us. The Bible tells us everything will work out for those who love God. So it's just kind of like putting your faith and trust in that, and it's getting through it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I appreciate you being here, man. Thank you for taking the time to hop on the podcast, and it was an absolute pleasure to interview you today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Just an awesome opportunity to, share my story over the last year. So I appreciate the platform and look forward to pushing this on my own channels.
Absolutely. And for those listening, if this has inspired you in any way, like let us know in the comments down below. You can find Derek on Instagram, and he also has his own podcast. And so there's lots and lots of places to listen to his content and learn more about his story as well. And we hope you can catch you next time on another Ride with Purpose podcast.